One of the biggest concerns that new hunters have when they start Western hunting or they begin their Western hunting journey is understanding just how you get a tag. There are so many different point systems. Every state has their own rules and way that they approach things. It is a daunting process. And I think many people just get put off and never start because they simply don't know where to begin or how to understand the complex rules of the West. On this podcast, episode 37, Navigating Western Hunting Point Systems, we're going to talk all about it. We're going to talk about bonus points, preference points, lottery tags, and I'm going to break down the most common Western hunting states, the point system that they use. And by the end of this podcast, you will no longer be able to say that you don't understand Western hunting point systems. You're going to know what they are, what states use what systems, and you'll have a better idea of how you can incorporate them into your own personal application and point building strategy. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I'm Andrew Lukosevic. I started hunting in 2018, and since then I've hunted 6 different states. I have chased everything from bull elk to mule deer, pronghorn, and whitetail deer. And my mission with this podcast is to help as many people start Western hunting as possible. All right, so diving into this podcast, let's start with the 2 different ways that you can actually get a tag in the West. There's only 2 ways, and they get more complicated with subcategories, but at a high level, there are only 2 ways. You can either have an over-the-counter tag or you draw a tag. That's really it at a high level. When you think of hunting in your own state, if you already are a hunter, you probably think of your whitetail deer tags as just a tag that you get. Well, that is an over-the-counter tag. OTC tags are your typical first come, first serve. There may or may not be a limit on the amount of tags that are available for people to use. But generally speaking, anyone can get a tag if it's over the counter. When you're looking outside of your home state, the first state that probably comes to mind for Western hunting is Colorado and their non-resident elk tags. Now that's changing in 2025 as the archery tag is going to be a draw, but there will still be over-the-counter OTC rifle elk tags. I mentioned earlier that OTC tags can have limits, but they also might not have limits, and that changes from state to state or even species or a type of hunt within a state. So Utah is an excellent example of this with their over-the-counter any bull hunts. Utah has an any bull archery season and they have an any legal weapon season, and these both run every year. The archery season is a truly unlimited over-the-counter elk hunting tag. They will not stop selling that tag. You can show up and go to a Walmart in Utah and you can pick up an any bull archery elk tag as long as the season is going on or it's an eligible time to get it. On the other hand, Utah has what is called the any legal weapon season. This is like your rifle season, really. Most people use a rifle during that season. That has a cap or a limit, and that limit is 15,000 tags as of recording this in 2024. If you were listening to this in the future, things may have changed. I will probably have put out a new version of this podcast by then. But anyway, once that 15,000 cap is hit, there are no more tags that are eligible. So these are both considered over the counter because there are no restrictions on who can get them. You just buy the tag. But once they run out if there is a cap, and there aren't always necessarily caps. The other thing to consider for OTC tags is that they are usually for general units. General units are units that anyone can hunt. They are not usually managed by the state for trophy potential. They are opportunity type hunts. They are the best option for people who want to get out there, hunt, and have an experience and a chance of finding success. Although OTC tags can be general, it doesn't mean that they're exclusively general. There are drawn hunts that are for general units. So Montana and Wyoming are the first 2 states that come to my mind that have drawn hunts for general units. And what that means, that general unit is an over-the-counter tag for a resident. If you are a resident in that state, it's the same one that is eligible to you. It's the same one that's eligible to me in Tennessee for deer. It's the same one that is eligible to you probably in your home state for whitetail deer. If you are a resident of, say, Wyoming, then you would be able to just get that tag and hunt whatever unit. As a non-resident for some states, Utah is not one of those, but Wyoming is, you have to draw that general tag that a resident can just get because they live in that state. Same type of hunt, same concept, but in one case it's over the counter, in the other case it's a drawn. So at a high level, that is your over the counter hunts. They are first come, first serve, generally speaking, and they are usually general hunts in general units. You're not going to find the best trophy potential, maybe not even the best population densities, but you will have an opportunity to hunt. Most people are kind of familiar with that, and I'm not going to dive into that anymore on this podcast because this is really about points, which brings us to the next subject, drawn hunts. So the second type of tag or permit that you can get is a drawn hunt. This is the one that tends to confuse people because you'll hear that there are three different types. There are bonus points, there are preference points, there are random draws or lottery draws. And there are hybrid systems, and each state does things differently. I want to demystify that and talk about those more. Before diving in, I'm going to break down all these different point systems, and I'm also going to break down the different states. I want to just say that I have not applied in every state. So I don't have personal experience in some of the states that I'm going to talk about. And in general, when you apply for a state, if you are not successful in the drawing, you tend to get awarded a point. Now, that's not the case for every state, and I'll talk about a couple of those. But because I haven't applied in every single state, and I will point those out when I talk about them, make sure you take some time to read the specifics for that state, because I'm not going to break down in depth everything. If I did that, this podcast would be incredibly long. In order to make this digestible and actionable for you to help you understand how the systems work, I'm just going to be doing a high level overview of each state and sort of what my thoughts are and how I approach it. All right, with that sort of before diving in disclaimer out of the way, let's dive in then. So we're going to start with bonus points. I like to compare bonus points to a weighted lottery system. If you've ever done a school fair or an auction of some kind where you can buy tickets to get in, and you can buy one ticket, you can buy 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, however much you want to spend money on the tickets, and that's how many chances that you have when they draw. Although that's not a perfect comparison to how bonus points work, it's pretty close. The more bonus points you have, the better your chances of drawing are. You can't buy multiple bonus points for a state each year, but every year that you buy a point or apply and are awarded a point, the next time you go in the application, you have more points and better chances. And this is especially true if the state has a multiplier. Several states in the West have a multiplier. Montana, for example, squares your points and then adds one, while Texas, on the other hand, cubes your bonus points. Let's just say that you have 2 bonus points, and we'll break down Montana and Texas. In Montana, with 2 bonus points, it's 2 times 2, you're squaring, so that's 4, plus 1 for the current point application that you're doing. So you have 2 historical points, and then you get 1 for the new one. So you get 5 total points going into that draw. If you're in Texas and you're doing the same thing, you are actually cubing your points. So it's 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. What these bonus point systems mean is that the more points you have, the greater your odds of drawing, especially if they do a weighted bonus point system like Texas or Montana. But you always have a chance. And although I haven't broken down states in detail yet, I know this is true because when I drew my Arizona bull elk tag, I only had a 7% chance of drawing that tag. I drew it because there is always a random chance because they use a bonus point system. It isn't necessarily going to the person with the most points. So at a high level, that is a breakdown of bonus points. The next category of points that you need to know and understand in Western hunting is preference points. Preference points are similar to bonus points in that every year you can get one. In general, if you do not draw a hunt, you are awarded a preference point, or they'll have a points only period, which Montana come to mind for that. The biggest difference between preference points and bonus points is how they determine who's going to be the winner. So in bonus points, the more points you have, the better your chances. With a true preference point system, everything goes to the people with the most points. If you don't have the highest number of points, you are not going to get the tag for that specific application. And then the last category of points are none. There are states that use a completely random draw. Everyone is on a level playing field. No points. This would be considered a fair drawing system. And if you are just getting started, you have no points yet, and you want to get in there and start applying, you should consider these states. So there's only two. There's New Mexico and Idaho, and they do it for specific tags. At least Idaho does. But if you are just getting started, you don't want to deal with points and point creep and all of that, I would highly encourage you to look at applying for hunts in both Idaho and New Mexico. Now, it wouldn't be right for me to have a podcast dedicated to navigating the Western hunting point systems without addressing the elephant in the room that many of you may have heard of. And if you haven't, we're going to talk about it right now: point creep. If you've heard of point creep but don't really understand what it means, it is essentially when all of a sudden the number of points required to draw a hunt goes up. This can happen for a lot of different reasons. Generally, though, I think it happens because most people, myself included, buy points and sit on them. They don't necessarily try to cash in all of their points every single year. So that means that when the right moment comes, they cash in. And that right moment can happen for a number of reasons. It could be because of changing regulations. The state might change things, like how Wyoming did for their general elk tags, how they used to be the entire state and now it's region based. You have to pick your specific region. I suspect that we are going to see certain regions of the state have a spike in the number of points required. That is point creep. Other things that could lead to point creep are how Colorado is getting rid of the over-the-counter archery hunts. If you have been building archery elk points for a couple of years and you're worried about all of these other units coming in and people having to get involved in the point system that never were before, you might want to cash in the points that you have and take advantage of them before there are even more people trying to build points. Both of these things can cause a change in demand, and that means that you will see a change in the amount of points required. Other things that can impact it are weather. This is particularly true in states like Arizona, where the drought season can impact the success. If there's a really wet year and people think it's going to be great growth year for antlers and just general herd health, people might cash in their points and they might wait. In general, it's either going to be caused by someone trying to take advantage of what they feel is an opportunity, or it's going to be based on fear and they think they're going to lose out on opportunity because some change is happening. Although these are only a few examples that I can think of right now, it's an important reason for you to consider having and adopting a multi-state and multi-species application strategy. So I'm not going to dive into the specifics for each state and species and do anything really personalized on this. I'm just going to give you an overview. But if you are financially capable of building a multi-state, multi-species strategy, you protect yourself from having to stress about where you can hunt, because you can realistically only go on so many hunts a year, but you can build points for multiple states and multiple species. You can essentially cycle through different states and different species and always draw a decent tag. That will allow you to avoid the lower point tags, which should hopefully reduce some hunting pressure, give you better opportunities, and allow you to always go on a relatively good hunt. Before we go into each state and talk about the system that they use, I want to say that this is not an in-depth breakdown. And I know I've already touched on this, but I just want you to know that this is not the end-all be-all. Some states use different systems for different species. I'm focusing on this primarily for elk, deer, and pronghorn because I think those are the ones that most people are going to apply for. Some states handle things like sheep and moose and bison, if they have any of those, completely differently, and they have their own system. If you're interested in a breakdown of those sort of trophy animals, let me know by commenting on this YouTube video if you're watching it on YouTube, or reach out to me on Instagram at Endurhunt, ENDURHUNT, and I will happily create that podcast. I'm just not sure how many people want to understand what it's like to apply for moose, sheep, goat, etc. The other thing I'm not going to do in this breakdown is talk about the financials. I do intend on putting out a podcast dedicated to budgeting for Western hunting and applications and point building. I'm going to do that one in this series. So please make sure that you are subscribed so that you don't miss it when that one comes. I think that one will be very valuable. But I wanted to break down the different point systems before talking about the money so that you know where you want to put your time and effort. Okay. So let's get started with breaking down these traditional, what I consider traditional Western hunting states and the point system that they use. First, we're going to start with Arizona. And the reason that I'm starting with Arizona is that although they are not a short-term state, you probably will not draw a hunt for the first 5 years you put in. There is always a chance. I drew my Arizona bull elk tag the second year that I applied. And for me, this is considered a must apply state. Even if I don't think I'm going to draw, I always apply in Arizona. Arizona uses a bonus point system, but they do it as a hybrid system. So Arizona does 3 passes for their tags. The first pass is just the top 20% point holders for their first and second choice hunts. So essentially, this is sort of like a preference point system. The first pass awards the tags to the highest point holders for that particular hunt unit and code. The second pass looks at everyone else's first and second choices. And this is where the bonus point system comes in, where it is basically random. The more bonus points you have, the better chances you have, but anyone can draw a tag. If the system goes through and there are still tags available, then they look at your third, fourth, fifth choices in the third pass. Personally, I only ever do first 2. I don't think that it'll get to the 3, 4, and 5. So I don't even consider my options for the third pass. But the reason that I consider Arizona a must-apply state every year, regardless of the fact that it's a bonus point system, and I know that chances are I'm not going to draw a tag for more than 5 years, realistically, depending on what you're applying for, they have a loyalty point as well. So if you apply for the same species 5 years in a row, you get a loyalty point. You only maintain it every year you consistently apply. So if you miss a year, you lose it and you start over. But let's just say you apply for 5 years and you don't draw, but you go in next year and it would be your 6th point. Well, because you applied for 5 years in a row, you actually have 7 points. And let's say you draw. So now you draw on with 7 points and you go in again next year and you apply. You would normally start with 0. Actually, you're going to start with 1. Now, 1 may not seem like it's going to make a difference, but because it's a bonus point, every extra point that you can get is extremely helpful. The other thing you can do with Arizona is get a permanent bonus point for doing their hunter safety education. You can do it both in person or online. It is expensive to do it online, but you get a permanent bonus point. I have not done that yet personally, although it's one thing that I do intend on doing. All right. Next up, we have Colorado. Colorado is a preference point state. 25% of their tags go to non-residents for deer, elk, pronghorn, and black bear. For me, Colorado is not a must-apply state, but I do build a point every year. Although they're a preference point state because they have such high population density, there's a lot of areas you can hunt. You actually can get a tag every few years, depending on the type and quality that you're looking for. For me, I definitely put them in a must get a point state. Every year I at least do that, but I will only apply in Colorado if I think I have a good chance of drawing the tag that I want. Next up is Wyoming. The first thing I want to talk about with Wyoming is that they do not award a point for an unsuccessful application. They are one of 2 states that have a point-only period where after the application's done, you go in and you buy the point for whatever species that you want. So if you apply and you don't draw in Wyoming, you have to remember to do that. That points only period is actually open right now. It opens July 1st. So Wyoming uses what I would consider a hybrid system, but technically they call it preference points. And their draw system can get very complicated. So I'm going to keep it just the highest level so that you can understand it. 75% of tags are awarded to those with the most points, and then 25% are awarded at random, like a bonus point system. It pays to have the highest number of points for those hard to draw units because the vast majority of tags do go to the highest point holders. but there is technically always a chance, and some people draw elk hunts on their first or second year applying. If you're interested in Wyoming, and I would highly encourage you, they're one of those states that I don't consider them a must apply. And the reason for that is, and we'll talk about this more on the budgeting one, but they require you to put the tag cost up front. But they are absolutely a state where I buy a point every single year. Them and Arizona are the two states that I've been getting points in the longest. So I have the most points in both of those states. The next state is Montana. Montana uses both preference points and bonus points depending on what you are applying for. They are the second state also that has a points only period, which is also open if you want to buy a preference point or a bonus point. You can do so right now. Just like Wyoming, it opens July 1st. For non-residents, basically, if you are looking to apply for a general elk or a general deer permit, they use preference points. If you remember earlier in the podcast, I talked about how there are some states where you as a non-resident have to draw a general tag. Montana is one of those, and so is Wyoming, where you have to draw the same tag that a resident can get every single year. I mentioned that Montana uses both point systems. So we'll talk specifically about elk and deer for a moment, and then I'll talk about the other species. But for limited entry elk and deer, they use a bonus point system. The caveat, the thing that you need to know is that in order to qualify, this is the way that Montana works. And although I don't want to dive into all the details, I think that this is important for you to understand if you're interested in Montana. In order to qualify or be eligible for the limited entry draw, you have to draw the general elk tag or deer tag or big game combination, which you have to draw a general tag first. So you technically need to pay attention both to preference points and bonus points. That is specific for general elk and general deer and limited entry elk and deer. If you want to hunt pronghorn or other species, it's all bonus points. They're just bonus points. You don't have to worry about the weird preference point and bonus point system that they use for elk and deer. I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but I thought it was worth mentioning again. Montana does square your bonus points, specifically bonus points. It's not applicable for preference points. They square it and then add one if you are applying for that season. So if you have 2 bonus points, it's 2 times 2 plus 1 for the current year. For me, Montana, I buy a bonus point every year. And I only apply for a preference point if I want to draw it due to the way the system works. Again, I'm not going in depth. If you want a podcast breaking down Montana, please let me know. The next state is Utah. Utah also uses both preference points and bonus points. Their system is much simpler than Montana, though, much easier for you to understand. Preference points are only used for general deer hunts. Again, this is a general deer hunt, so the tag that residents can get, non-residents have to build preference points for and apply for. For everything else, it is a bonus point system. So your limited entry deer, all of the elk hunts minus the over-the-counter stuff, pronghorn, it's all bonus points. It's worth noting that only 10% of tags go to non-residents, so that is something to consider. For me personally, I started building points in Utah in the beginning, and I have not, in the last few years, bought any points. I think I'm going to change that and start buying points again because there is always a chance, and just being transparent with everyone, the reason that I stopped is Utah is a state where there's so much competition. That system has been in place for so long that for most hunts, you're relying totally on a random. There is no real chance that if you buy every single year that you're guaranteed a tag. You're totally reliant on the random draw for Utah. And that's one of the reasons that I personally stopped. But there is always a chance, and I see people draw tags. So that's the reason that I consider I need to reconsider my options with Utah. The next state we're going to talk about is Nevada. Non-residents, Nevada is an interesting state because non-residents are actually in a separate pool. So you're not competing with residents because the set number of tags for those different hunts is already put aside for non-residents. Nevada uses a bonus point system as well, and they square their bonus points the exact same way that Montana does. The downside to Nevada is that although they have incredible trophy potential, their populations are generally lower, and there is a lot of competition because of how well managed they are for trophy potential. For the vast majority of hunts, as a non-resident, you're pretty much completely reliant on the random chance that you get the tag from being in the bonus entry. From what I understand, it's actually difficult for residents to draw tags as well in Nevada. So we're not alone in that front. Nevada is one of the states that I do not apply for. It isn't that I don't want to, I do, but because of how difficult it is to draw a tag and how just far away it is from where I live personally, I have not added them into my multi-state, multi-species strategy at this point. The next state is New Mexico. New Mexico is probably the easiest state to talk about. Random draw for all species for non-residents. Anything you want, it's a random draw, period. The only other thing to say about New Mexico is that they do require you to front the cost of the tag. So although it may sound like a great state to apply in, if you apply for every species, it gets very expensive very quick. And we will talk about that on a future podcast. The last state that I'm going to talk about is Idaho. So Idaho does technically have over-the-counter hunts today, but that is changing. And the over-the-counter tags that they had are going to be entered into their draw. I'm not exactly sure what that new system is going to look like as of this recording. So I figured I would just mention it and then talk about their controlled hunts. So their controlled hunts are what other states call limited entry. And just like New Mexico, these are completely random draw. I personally have never done the Idaho draw system, and I've never done the over-the-counter either. And that's not because there aren't chances to draw tags, but merely because I live far away from Idaho, and traveling to Idaho is a lot. So I have not added them to my system yet. All right, that is my breakdown of the different Western hunting point systems and states. I tried to base this off of my own personal experience mostly, and tell you the states where I've learned and researched, but have not applied in personally. And I know I did not include every single state, but my hope is that this gave you a good understanding of the point systems and how they work, and is going to help you get started with building your own strategy and have an idea of how these different states might fit into that strategy. If you have more questions, concerns, or you want some personalized coaching, please reach out to me. I recently started doing personalized coaching through the Endure Hunt brand. I actually have a website where you can join the waiting list. I only do so many each month. You can join that at endurhunt.com, endurhunt.com. I will also link that in the show note description. If you just want to give me feedback, if you think there's something that I missed or something that I should have talked about that would have been valuable to people, or if you have an idea for a future podcast that you'd like to hear me talk about, reach out to me on social media at EndurHunt, ENDURHUNT, across the board. I'm most active on Instagram. That would be the best one to get in touch with me. But I really do hope that you benefited from this. I appreciate that you spend time and took it out of your day to listen to this podcast and spend it with me. I don't take that for granted. I do hope that you learn from this and are able to apply and grow as a Western hunter after listening to this podcast. So just want to say that I appreciate all of you, and I'll see you all next time.